We're back. Welcome back to Powers and Panels, your comics universe, old and new. Can't believe it, but here we are at episode 6. And I have to say, you all came through on last week's question. We asked you if Kraven had kept going, kept hunting, could Spider-Man have actually stopped him in the long run? And the answers in the comments. Look, some of you really sat with that. Some of you said, yes, Peter always finds a way. And some of you said no. And the ones who said no, I respect that because this was a very unique situation. I'm not entirely sure you're wrong, but we will get into that. Before we do, I want to quickly welcome my sidekick, Zoey. I want to say welcome back. How you doing? And Zoey, welcome. It's been a couple weeks. What's your reaction to those comments?
Hello, Blaze. Good to see you too. Great to be here. Talking again about that guy crawling on walls and spinning his webs everywhere. Spider-Man. Oh, I am so glad we are not talking about Kraven today from our last episode, as I am genuinely trying to get that image out of my mind. The cat vest, the leopard tights. Once you see those tights, you cannot unsee them. I still have so many questions, and none of them have satisfying answers from that story, and I need us to move on immediately. So moving on, the listener who said Kraven would have eventually won because Peter's mercy is also his greatest weakness. That person woke up and chose to make us feel things before noon, and I respect it deeply. I personally think Spider-Man always finds the way and would have got the job done. But I will absolutely admit that answer made me sit down for a second. But okay. Here is what I also know. We are now in episode 6, and we are still in this Spider-Man block. And today's story is one that I have been told is going to emotionally wreck me. Blaze told me, quote, "This one is going to hurt." So I do want to say, welcome everyone to Powers and Panels. We are so glad you are here, and I will see you at the end where I will be processing my feelings openly and at length. Blaze, the floor is yours.
I do love Zoe's takes. As always, she's got great ones. My take is I do believe that Spider-Man, that whole great powers, great responsibility thing would have led him to eventually found a way to eventually defeat Kraven and get his life back on track. I cannot vote against Spider-Man. I cannot go against Spider-Man because he always seems to find a way. So Zoey will be processing her feelings. She'll be back. That's an accurate preview, though, because I do have to take a breath before I get into this one, because this is not a fun episode. It's an important episode. It is one of the most important episodes we're going to do this entire year. It is not a fun episode. It's a huge moment in Spider-Man's life. It's the kind of episode where you finish and you just sit there for a minute. We're talking about the Night Gwen Stacy Died. Going back to Amazing Spider-Man issues 121 and 122, published in June and July of 1973, written by Jerry Conway, penciled by Gil Kane, inked by John Romita Sr. and Tony Mortallaro. 2 issues. 2 huge issues, though. That's all. 52 years ago. A lot of us and a lot of folks weren't born when the story came out. But there were a lot of reverberations from these 2 issues that are still shaping superhero comics today. This is a story that ended the Silver Age of comics, not a slow fade, not a gradual transition, but a hard stop. And ending a moment so brutal and so irreversible that the entire medium of American superhero comics divided into before and after it. And at the center of it is a 20-year-old girl named Gwen Stacy, who was smart and warm and real, and who deserved so much better than what happened to her on a bridge in New York City in those 2 issues. So before I tell you what happened, I need to tell you who Gwen Stacy was, because she is not a plot device. She is not just the dead girlfriend in Peter Parker's history. She is a fully realized character who mattered in her own right. And the reason her death hit as hard as it did and still hits is because Conway and Romita and the team had spent years making her real. Gwen Stacy debuted in Amazing Spider-Man issue 31 in 1965. She was a college student at Empire State University, where Peter was also studying. And from the beginning, she was written as something you do not see a lot of in superhero comics in that era, a smart woman with her own opinions, her own personality, her own life. She was a pre-med student. She was sharp. She could give Peter Parker, who himself is one of the genuinely brilliant characters in Marvel Comics, as good as she got intellectually. Their relationship was not Spider-Man rescuing a helpless girl. It was a real relationship between two real people who genuinely loved each other. So her father was Captain George Stacy, a retired NYPD captain, a good man, a man who figured out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man and kept that secret because he understood what Peter was doing and he respected it. He died in Amazing Spider-Man number 90, killed during a battle, and his last words to Peter were, "Take care of her." He knew, he looked at his daughter and Spider-Man, and he knew, and he asked Peter to protect her, and Peter took that as a solemn responsibility. He loved her, he was going to protect her. So the context is not incidental, it is the foundation of everything that follows, because Peter Parker's entire identity as Spider-Man is built on the failure to protect. Going back to when he first got his powers, he could not protect his Uncle Ben, who died because Peter did not act when he had the chance. That failure is the origin of the character's moral spine, that with great power comes great responsibility. And Peter learned that lesson through the worst possible way. He has lived with it every day since, and now the woman he loves, whose father trusted him with her life, is in the crosshairs of the most dangerous man Peter has ever faced. And that man is Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. And I need to spend a minute on him too, because by 1973, the Osborn and Parker relationship is already one of the most complicated in all of comics. Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, is the first major villain who figured out Spider-Man's secret identity. He had Peter unmasked, he knew exactly who he was, and he used that knowledge as a weapon. He had also, at this point in the story, lost his memory of being the Green Goblin multiple times. He had periods of relative normality, periods where Peter almost believed it was over. But the Goblin kept coming back. The serum that gave Norman his strength and his durability also amplified something dark and unstable in his psychology. He was not simply a criminal, he was a genuinely dangerous man with a genuinely disturbed mind who had a personal obsession with Spider-Man that had become pathological. Okay? So now, as we get into this some more, with that being said, when we arrive at Amazing Spider-Man 121, we have Peter Parker in love carrying the promise he made to a dying man to protect his daughter, Gwen Stacy, real and alive and beloved, who has no idea how much danger being close to Spider-Man actually puts her in. And Norman Osborn, who has snapped again, he went on the crazy train again and went back to being a Green Goblin, fully, completely. He knows exactly where to strike to hurt Spider-Man the most. So now, Amazing Spider-Man 121, June 1973, the cover shows Spider-Man on a bridge, the Green Goblin looming above him, and Gwen Stacy in the Goblin's grasp. The cover line reads, "The Night Gwen Stacy Died." Marvel put her name on the cover. They told you what was coming, and readers still did not believe it, because in superhero comics in 1973, the hero always saves the person on the cover. That was the contract. That's how it always worked. This issue opens with Norman Osborn fully in Goblin mode, the costume, the Goblin glider, the Goblin's mask back in place over whatever Norman Osborn used to be. And Jerry Conway writes this inner monologue with completely great clarity. He is going to destroy Spider-Man, not hurt him, not humiliate him, but completely destroy him. And the way to do that is not to hurt Peter Parker. It is to take from him the things that he loves most. So he kidnaps Gwen Stacy. She is taken from her apartment before Peter can get to her. And then Norman calls Peter, taunts him, and tells him to come to the George Washington Bridge if he wants to save her. So I want to pause there because the creative team made a deliberate choice about which bridge was in the story. The script actually references the George Washington Bridge. Gil Kane drew the Brooklyn Bridge. The letters pages at the time were split on which bridge it actually was. Years later, Marvel canonized it as the George Washington Bridge. The naming matters less than the image because what Kane draws is one of the most defining simple images in the history of Spider-Man comics, the bridge tower, the goblin above it, Gwen in his arms, and Spider-Man arriving just barely too late. So we do have Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, arriving. He sees Gwen being held by the goblin at the top of one of the bridge's towers. She appears unconscious, and before Peter can reach her, before he can get close enough to grab her, the Green Goblin just throws her off the bridge. And Peter shoots a web line. He catches her. The web catches her ankle, and he pulls her back up, and she is dead. The web saved her from the fall. It did not save her from the goblin. Conway and Kane and the creative team made a choice that is still debated today, all these years later. Gwen Stacy died from the whiplash, the sudden stop. The web caught her, and the physics of that catch, the snap at the end of the line, killed her. There is a sound effect on that page, a simple, quiet sound effect, snap. One syllable, and Spider-Man does not know, for one beat, for one terrible panel, what just happened. And then he pulls her up and realizes she's dead. So that is what, makes this story, huge, because the letters column in that issue included this from the creative team addressing the question later raised by readers. Yes, the snap represents her neck. The whiplash, the web that saved her, also killed her. And the reason this is so devastating is because it means that Peter did everything right. He came when called. He got there. He fired the web. He caught her. He did everything a hero is supposed to do, and she still died. Not because he failed, but because the physics of her death were already in motion the moment she left the goblin's hands. So he could not have saved her, not from that fate. And this is what makes it unbearable, because it's not a story about Spider-Man being too slow or too weak or making the wrong choice. It's a story about a universe that does not always let the hero win, even when the hero does everything right. It is a story about the randomness of loss, and Peter Parker, who already carries the weight of every death he believes he could have prevented, now has to bear this one too. So issue 121 ends with Peter cradling Gwen's body on the bridge, the Green Goblin escaping, and Peter Parker knowing with absolute certainty that this is his fault. Not because he failed to act, but because he is Spider-Man, because being close to him is a death sentence for the people he loves. He asked a dead man's daughter to love him, and he could not protect her. Issue 122 is the aftermath, and Conway does something remarkable here. He does not let Spider-Man be the grieving hero for long. Peter Parker is furious. He's not in mourning. He is enraged. He goes after the Green Goblin with everything he has, with no restraint, with the explicit internal acknowledgement that he might kill Norman Osborn when he finds him, that he wants to, that some part of him believes it would be justice. The fight is brutal. Peter beats the Goblin. He has him. Norman is at his mercy, and in those final panels, Peter has to make the choice, the hardest choice he has ever made, to not cross that line. Not because he does not want to, not because he believes Norman Osborn does not deserve it, but because crossing that line would mean becoming something that Gwen Stacy's memory cannot be honored by. He loved her, and he has to decide what that love means now that she's gone. So the resolution, and I will not say it as satisfying because it is not, because it was not meant to be, is that Norman dies anyway. The Goblin glider, remote control, comes from behind and impales him, very similar to what we saw in that first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire and William Dafoe as the Green Goblin. But not by Peter's hand. The universe took that choice away from Peter and gave him no closure at all. He did not choose to spare Osborn. he did not get to choose, and Peter Parker is left with everything: the grief, the rage, the what ifs, the promise he made to Captain Stacy, and none of the answers he needed. So I want to spend some time on that snap because it's one of the most analyzed single moments in superhero comics history, and it does deserve some attention. The debate started the moment the issue came out in 1973. Did the web kill her? Could Peter have saved her if he had done something differently? Could he have caught her differently? Angled the web differently? Been just a fraction faster? Readers were not ready to accept the answer, which is no. There was no version of that rescue that worked. The fall from that height stopped that suddenly. The physics were lethal regardless. So this was actually addressed years after publication by writer Sean Howe and physics researchers who used the details of the fall as described in a comic to calculate the forces involved. The conclusion was consistent with what Conway intended, that terminal velocity from that height, stopped by a web attached at the ankle, would produce forces of somewhere between 9 and 10 Gs at that point of a snap. The human body, and particularly the human neck and spine, cannot absorb that. She was dead the moment the web went taut. So some fans have argued over the years that Peter should have caught her differently, that a catch around the waist or a cushioning web net or any other number of variations would have worked. And this is where I want to be precise. In the time Peter had from the moment she left the Goblin's hands to the moment the web needed to be released, there was no calculation available to him. He was reacting. He fired the web because it was the only thing he could do. The tragedy is not that he chose wrong. The tragedy is that there was no right choice in that window. So Conway has said in interviews that the intent was always for Gwen to die, that the snap was deliberate, and that he wanted readers to understand that the web itself was complicit in her death. Not because Peter did anything wrong, but because sometimes the tools of heroism are not enough, and sometimes catching someone is not the same as saving them. That distinction, catching versus saving, is one of the deepest things this story says about what it means to be Spider-Man. Peter Parker can do extraordinary things. He can swing through New York City at 60 miles an hour, lift 10 times, he can lift 10 tons. He can dodge things that should be impossible to dodge. He has his spider sense and crazy superhuman reaction reflexes. And he could not save Gwen Stacy, not because he was not fast enough, but because the universe on that particular night did not allow for it. So now the night Gwen Stacy died is generally considered the moment that ended the Silver Age of comics and began the Bronze Age. That is not just critical shorthand. It is a real historical marker that the entire industry recognizes, that historians of the medium point to with consensus 2 issues. That's all it took. So quick little history lesson here. The Silver Age of comics ran roughly 1956 to 1970, though you will get arguments about the endpoints, which was characterized by a fundamental contract between superhero comics and their readers. The heroes existed within a moral universe that made a certain kind of sense. The good guys always won. The civilians were protected. The bad guys were always stopped. There were stakes in individual issues, but the overarching structure of a superhero's life was one of ultimate competence. The hero was capable. The hero prevailed. The people the hero loved were safe because the hero was always there to protect them. Gwen Stacy's death broke that contract, not by killing a character. Characters had died in comics before, but by killing her the way she was killed, by making it impossible for Spider-Man to save her, by making the hero's own best efforts complicit in the death, by refusing to reset, by leaving Peter Parker with consequences that did not go away at any point or any time in the future after that, or in a decade since, has just been a horrible thing for him to bear. So before this story, death in superhero comics meant very little because it was almost never permanent. Characters came back, situations resolved. The universe itself was always righted after the story. The industry slowly, and then all it was, had to reckon with the possibility that consequences could be permanent, that a character's death could not be real. could be real and could stay real forever. Gwen Stacy has never been resurrected in the main Marvel continuity. There have been clones, there have been alternate universe versions, like we have Spider-Gwen, for example. But Gwen Stacy, the real one, the one who loved Peter Parker on that bridge, has stayed dead for over 50 years. That is remarkable in a medium where almost no death is truly permanent. Her death has been all that time permanent. So the effect on Peter Parker specifically is impossible to overstate. That it's not just a wound he carries, it is the defining wound. His Uncle Ben's death created Spider-Man. Gwen Stacy's death defined what being Spider-Man costs. It established that being a hero is not enough to protect the people you love, that your power does not insulate you from loss, that the responsibility that comes with great power includes the responsibility to live with the times you cannot do enough. Peter Parker is the hero he is, always self-sacrificing, relentless, always showing up when it could cost him everything, partly because of what happened on that bridge. He cannot put it down. He does not try to. He carries it and he keeps going. So Jerry Conway was 20 years old when he wrote that story. He has talked about this in interviews over the years, the fact that he was a kid himself. I mean, probably roughly about the age of Peter Parker, the character he was writing about. So essentially, making one of the most consequential creative decisions in the history of the medium, he wanted to shake things up. He wanted to do something that felt real, that had real weight, that departed from the normal formula. He did not anticipate that over 50 years later, people would still be talking about it in terms of historical significance. He just knew it was the right story to tell and the one he wanted to bring to life. So Gil Kane's art in these two issues is extraordinary. The bridge sequences, especially the composition of those panels, the way Kane captures motion and horror and the terrible stillness of that final moment, in some of the finest sequential art in superhero comics history, the image of Peter holding Gwen on the bridge, the angle of the body, the way Kane frames Spider-Man's posture as one of absolute devastation. These are pages that have been reproduced and referenced and paid homage to for many decades, for several decades. Now, the story also has immediate real-world significance that went beyond comics. In 1971, the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare approached Marvel Comics to run a story addressing drug use, specifically heroin. The Comics Code Authority, the self-regulatory body that governed what could be published in mainstream comics, prohibited depictions of drug use even in a cautionary context. Stan Lee and Marvel ran the story anyway. In Amazing Spider-Man 96 through 98, without the Comics Code approval, the code subsequently revisited the guidelines, and they revised them. By 1973, when Conway was writing, the industry had already demonstrated it was willing to break with precedent to tell stories that had real stakes. The Night Gwen Stacy Died was the next step in that evolution. So the legacy extends forward through everything. Mary Jane Watson, who had always been in Peter's orbit as the fun, vivacious contrast to Gwen's more serious warmth, becomes the great love of Peter's life, partly because she is the one who was there afterward. She sat with him. She did not try to fix it. She understood that he was going to carry this forever, and she chose him anyway. That relationship that followed the marriage, the stories that came after that, was all built on the ground that Gwen Stacy's death had cleared up. So it's not just Peter who has to carry this. This is just one more person in the story whose position is almost impossible to think about, and that is Harry Osborn. Harry is Peter Parker's best friend, his roommate, and one of his closest people in his life, and Harry is also Norman Osborn's son. So when Norman dies in issue 122, Harry does not just lose his father, he eventually learns that his father was the Green Goblin, that the man who raised him is the man who killed Peter's girlfriend. Peter cannot grieve openly with his best friend because Harry is grieving too from the other side of the same nightmare. So there's no version of that conversation that ends cleanly for either one of them. You have two people who love each other sitting across from each other with Norman Osborn's shadow between them. That weight follows Harry for the rest of his life and shapes everything that comes after for both of them. These two issues do not just break Peter Parker, they fracture the entire world around him. So if you want to read it, and you should, because this is a great piece of history in the Spider-Man story. It's only 2 issues. Amazing Spider-Man 121 and 122 are collected in many places. They appear in the Essential Spider-Man collections and trade paperbacks titled specifically for this arc and on Marvel Unlimited. Read them in one sitting because they were published a month apart, but they read as one continuous story, and the emotional impact of going straight from 121 into issue 122 without a break is significant. So I am going to hand this back over to Zoey. I want to get her take on this, and I did warn her that this one was going to hit hard, and I do stand by that warning. Zoey, I want to give the floor back to you. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay. I have feelings. I have many, many feelings, and I am going to need a moment. But first, because consistency matters, the Green Goblin, I have to say something about this because this man decided that his supervillain look was going to be Goblin. Just fully committed to Goblin, green skin, pointy ears, little pointy shoes, purple outfit with those little, are those shorts? Those are shorts. The Green Goblin, one of the most dangerous supervillains in Marvel Comics, is doing all of this in what appears to be a green and purple Halloween costume, with shorts and pointy shoes, and a hat with little goblin horns, flying around New York on a bat-shaped glider throwing pumpkin bombs. He looks like a Spirit Halloween exclusive, and he still managed to ruin Peter Parker's entire life. I want you to sit with that. The most devastating moment in Spider-Man's history was delivered by a man in goblin shorts, and I cannot get past this. Okay, question of the week, and this one is personal. If Peter Parker had not been Spider-Man, if Gwen Stacy had fallen in love with just Peter Parker, the brilliant, kind, hardworking kid from Queens, and never had to share him with the mask, do you think they would have made it? Do you think they had a future? Or was the tragedy always waiting for them, costume or no costume? Drop your answer in the YouTube comments, as I genuinely want to know what you think. I can't wait to be with you all in another couple of weeks. Please be safe. And watch out for those goblins out there. Blaze, back to you to wrap this up.
Okay, so that question is going to keep me up for a week, and I do not think there is a clean answer. That is the point. I do want to thank you all for joining us again, as we are glad to be in the Spider-Man part of the world in the comic universe right now. I am Blaze. This is Powers and Panels. You just heard from Zoey, my trusty sidekick. She is great, and we will see you in 2 weeks for episode 7. We are staying in the Spider-Man neighborhood, and episode 7 is one that I approach with complicated feelings because it is one of the most controversial decisions that Marvel has ever made. If you know Spider-Man history, you may know what I mean, and if you do not, buckle up because this one's going to be an interesting story to actually hear about as well. So until then, we appreciate you joining us. Please keep reading, please keep thinking, please like us, please subscribe, and please remember, the web that catches you is not always the thing that saves you. Find the people worth catching anyway, and we'll see you soon.